Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I am your host, Alison Price, and in this episode I am delighted to have Toronto astrologer Michael Barwick on the show, and he will be discussing fixed stars. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So welcome, Michael Barwick. Thank you so much for joining me today as we are going to be discussing a very exciting topic in astrology.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy an opportunity to talk about my passion in the field.
So in this episode, we're going to be chatting about fixed stars, which I understand is really one of your focuses with astrology.
Yes, I have been studying them fairly intensely for the last 20 years and presenting on them. I really enjoy working with them, and I think that they're an undervalued, underappreciated, and unknown symbol system within the astrological literature.
Fantastic. I always like chatting with astrologers for my audience who are doing something specific with astrology rather than just general. And this is a very interesting topic. So for those of our listeners who perhaps don't know what a fixed star is, could you just share that with us?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to take a step back and ask ourselves what stars are, because as silly a question as that might seem, it's the fundamental basis of astrology in the sense that astrology means the study of the stars. As we know, what are stars? Well, stars are, depends on who you talk to, what a star is. A star could be a celebrity. A star could be a symbol of patriotism. It could be a sheriff star. There's all sorts of symbolic associations with star, but the primary experience of star and the definition that astrologers use is the definition of being a naturally luminous body in the sky. So not airplanes, but in fact, the natural lights in the sky that are up there. So traditionally, we had things, comets were referred to as hairy stars, meteorites as shooting stars, the planets, because they wandered through the heavens and moved, were called wanderers or wandering stars. And the word we have for planet derives from the ancient Greek word to wander. So what's left? What's left are the fixed stars, and fixed stars include the definition of star that scientists use today, which is a nuclear fusion furnace of sufficient mass to be self-luminous. But fixed stars would also refer to nebulae, those fuzzy kind of clouds in the sky that are related to stars, clusters, even a galaxy in one point that some astrologers use, any natural light in the sky. And why they're called fixed is because they do not move in relationship to each other, whereas the planets do move against the background of the fixed stars, and they move in relationship to to each other and form significant connections. The fixed stars just sit there. They're up there in the heavens, and for countless millennia, the sky was the only streaming service available to us.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So we looked at the planets, but we also looked at the fixed stars, and lore and projection and association and story was built up over thousands upon thousands of years. And today we have really only fragments of what the sky was about for human beings, because we have the Greek layer, which is only the most recent. There's a Christian layer that was tried back in the day, but the Greek layer with the Greek stories, Perseus myth, and so forth,
right,
being so important in terms of naming constellations, naming characters characters from these myths being in the constellation, being the names applied to these constellations, and our understanding of them, this Greek layer that we have.
Yeah. So it's, when you think about it, when humans evolved, Homo sapiens, the first guy, he's lying there at night on his back in the field looking up, and the stars have been with us since the beginning.
Well, we started with the moon, right? The moon was the obvious thing, right? Because they speculate that before there was natural light, before we had before we had fire and civilization and so forth, that human beings for countless ages, or human-like things that we evolved from, were in sync with the moon. And so the menstrual cycle of all the women in on the planet would be synced to the moon, where the new moon would be when a woman is having her period, and the full moon would be ovulation, and it would be, coincide with the it being light all night, right? So
Right,
you
right.
have all this impetus to go out and do natural things in the bushes, right? This is what they speculate, that human beings lived in this one cycle, in terms of relationship to the moon. So the earliest artifacts we have of astrology slash astronomy are these bones with markings of the phases of the moon, right? That are like 80,000 years old.
Yes.
Yeah. Once you start looking at, oh, there's a relationship between the moon and the menstrual cycles, once you start seeing that there's some kind of a connection between what's going on up here versus what's going on down here, then it becomes very, then you throw in everything eventually. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the current dilemma that we have in astrology today. There's so many symbols that we can add. The fixed stars seem like, another huge province, like the asteroids,
Yeah.
that you can work with.
Yeah. So let's face it, the fixed stars that we're talking about, we're going to be talking about today, actually they all occur probably in constellations.
Yes, all fixed stars are grouped into constellations. The constellations were established in 1928, in terms of where they officially are. Before that time, there was various splittings, although there was, some consensus about it. But in 1928, they standardized the 88 constellations of the
Okay.
sky, and these represent groups of fixed stars that form a particular pattern, or said to form a particular pattern in terms of a particular configuration of the stars. So, I mean, many of these constellations would be very familiar to astrologers because, of course, the constellations of Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and so forth, the zodiacal constellations are up there, although they don't, as astronomers like to point out, that they don't particularly align well with the even 30-degree signs that we use in astrology and tropical, but even Vedic astrology. You're going to find that constellations are not going to match up, because constellations are not nice, neat little things of 30 degrees each that fit in a segment on the wheel, no matter where you start it. So the question becomes, in terms of establishing zodiac, is where is 0 degrees Aries? Where is that? Because if it's not at the point where the equator and the ecliptic coincide, if that's not where it is, then where do you put it? And how do you incorporate? How do you split it? How do you deal with where there are gaps? How do you deal when other constellations overlap? How do you deal with gaps? How, so forth.
Yeah.
So it's the zodiac was always in terms of what we use in astrology is a symbolic perfection of a pattern that we observed. It's
back then. Yeah.
Back then, when the constellations were a little bit better aligned, but still, it still wasn't equal, because the constellations are not equal in size.
That's right. They're different sizes, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So the fixed stars that we in general astrologers are perhaps interested in, are they then within the zodiac constellations, or are we also considering other fixed stars that are in other constellations where they're not aligning with the ecliptic?
Well, I mean, the first problem is that the fixed stars, unlike the planets pretty well follow the ecliptic, more or less, above a little bit above, a little bit below, but pretty much the planets are close to the ecliptic, which is the apparent path the sun takes as we go through the year.
Yeah.
The sky. Now, but fixed stars are all over the sky, right? It's a sphere. right? It's a sphere. Now, the late great astrologer Dane Rudhyar said astrologers of the 21st century would be interpreting birth spheres. And I think that this is when you're coming to the fixed stars, that you have to start thinking in 3 dimensions. You can't just look at a 2-dimensional chart and say, well, this star is there and therefore that. You have to think about it and have a more precise understanding to get the best out of the fixed stars. For the planets, absolutely, you can use their projected positions, and
Right.
they will tell you something. The projected positions of the fixed stars have been used since Ptolemy calculated them back in the day, although the way Ptolemy, calculated them is not the same way that we calculate them today. But the idea of bringing the fixed stars to the ecliptic and interpreting them in terms of planets that would be conjunct those points is not a new idea. It's a very ancient idea in terms of working with them. But in terms of relating planets to the Earth, then you're talking more about really in ancient times, it was more about, well, is the star actually rising? Because if the star is sufficiently south of the ecliptic or north of the ecliptic, its ecliptic degree, its projected ecliptic degree may not tell you anything about where its position is.
Mm.
So, for example, you may have a star that is, say, Vega at 15 Capricorn approximately, and you think, well, when 15 Capricorn gets to the ascendant, then Vega rises. Well, no, because by the time 15 Capricorn gets to the ascendant at most latitudes in the north, Vega has long been up in the sky and rose, somewhat earlier, several hours earlier, 4 hours earlier, in fact, when Scorpio was rising. And the reason for this is because Vega is positioned so far north. It's a bright star. It's a brilliant star. We have all this lore about it. It's the brightest star in it's Alpha Lyra, the brightest star in the constellation of the Lyre. And so it has this magical, charismatic, poetic quality to it that the star is associated with, and it's a beautiful star. It's this beautiful blue-white star, fairly young star, but a beautiful star. And over the millennia, human beings have, see this star in this way, have associated this symbolism with it, this connection to it. And so even though it's so far north that it's away from the ecliptic, it's still used by many astrologers and is considered a very important star used by many astrologers in terms of incorporating it into their work because it's a bright star. This is the thing. It's not just the stars that may be necessarily on the ecliptic, but it's stars that have a lot of lore about them, bright stars that are significant. Bright stars that are close to the ecliptic, like the four stars, the four royal stars of Persia being Aldebaran, Regulus, Antares, and Fomalhaut. Those stars have a lot of lore about them because they're close to the ecliptic, and at one point they aligned with the equinox and solstices, and so it would have been noticed that when the sun's here, then it's a turning of the year. So they had, and from a telling the time perspective, because they're approximately 90 degrees apart, you could always, depending on the season, you could always roughly guesstimate what time it was on the basis of which of these four stars was visible in the sky.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So what we have here is that we've got a group of fixed stars that are close aligned with the ecliptic, so they are generally going to be visible in most people's charts. And then, of course, we have stars that are quite north. That will be, if you were born in the northern hemisphere, that would be significant for you. And then, of course, the southern stars, because I spent most of my life in South Africa. There are different stars there that don't rise in the north, so we're never even. I don't want to say known by the Greeks who are getting this thing, but the point is that there are seems to be more northern centric stars available, and with myth that goes with it.
Well, sure. Well, I mean, astrology arose in the Northern
Yeah,
Hemisphere. Astrology is a Northern Hemisphere system. You can't,
yeah,
that's part of it. But I think, and some argue that, well, if this star never rises in the location in which you're born, then why should you be using it? You shouldn't be, you shouldn't be using it. But unfortunately, it seems to work that even though the star may not appear in the sky where
in
you
your view.
are
Oh, so
ever,
mm,
I mean, I think of the classic example being, I can't remember which of the two stars that Billy Graham's Venus is tied to, but it's tied to one of the stars in the Southern Cross, right? Now, he is nowhere near born where the Southern Cross is. Um, and yet Billy Graham is, identified most strongly with someone who loved the cross, who loved Christianity, I mean, that symbolism is very strong in his life. And here we see, when we look at his chart, we see this strong connection between Venus and the projected position of, I can't remember which star it is in the Southern Cross. They're both so close together when
yeah,
you project them to the ecliptic, but one of them, it's his Venus is right on top of.
right.
So I think, I mean, that's just one example. I mean, you can argue it back and forth. I tend not to. I have to confess, Allison, and I don't take a particularly scientific approach to
Okay,
astrology. Like I'm not of that school. I know that, I mean, one of the criticisms about astrology is that it's a pseudoscience. If you go onto Wikipedia, much to our dismay, the astrological community's dismay, and you look up astrology, you're going to find that it says that it's a pseudoscience. Well, and some astrologers treat it that way, that it's like somehow, well, if we can prove this on the basis of this, whatever it is that we're looking at. And I'm not dismissing those people. If they want to do that kind of work, that's up to them.
mm,
But I'm not, when it comes to my fixed star research, I tend to look at superlative examples of people who are working with or have worked in their lives with a fixed star to get some sense of what the potential of the star is and whether we can see the themes that that star represents in the person's life. So when
right.
I do presentations about fixed stars, I do in-depth case studies of looking at specific charts with specific stars and in relationship to the chart as a whole. You can't separate out fixed stars from the chart because they're dependent. They are dependent symbols. They have to have a planet to do something with. A fixed star by itself, sitting up there in the heavens, is helpless
Yeah,
unless it has a planet for agency that gives it something
okay.
gives
And
it a
you
way.
would you want to work with visible planets at this stage, or
I only work with Moon Saturn. It's easy to get overwhelmed with fixed stars, like very easy. It's also very easy in fixed stars to what I, to suffer from the malady I refer to as fixed star fever, where it's like, well, if we're going to put this fixed star in, then we have to put that fixed star in, and if we're going to put that fixed star in, then this fixed star over here. Everybody wants in on the act, right? As soon as you start talking about fixed stars, I mean, I have a number of sets of fixed stars that I work with, and the biggest set I have is 108 stars, which is ridiculous. If you use all the name stars, just the stars that have formal names in the heavens, then you're looking at a total of over 300 fixed stars to work with.
so where would you, if someone was going to start dipping their toe into fixed stars, do you have a couple of stars that you could recommend people kind of start with first?
There's 7 that people should consider, in addition to the royal stars of Persia, which is Aldebaran, Regulus, and Antares and Fomalhaut. Then the other stars to worth considering are Sirius and Spica, and of course everybody's favorite fixed star, Algol. Everybody should include Algol.
So that's 7 stars that you.
Well, that's a good basic set to
It
start,
is.
because
That's good.
if a planet if a planet is conjunct the projected position of one of those fixed stars,
Right.
it can have a profound effect in terms of influencing the themes and the approach of that star, and the power of that star. I mean, one of the metaphors that I use to describe fixed star contacts with planets is that it's like having a superpower, right? Like it really it gives the planet this extra battery pack, this extra source of energy, this extra spiritual input, which is, not solar. It's different light the stars provide. It's not solar. It's not the warmth of the sun. It's a very chilly, transpersonal light of the star. And it has an agenda, and it wants to assert that agenda. And as soon as it has a planet, then it has a means to assert that agenda. And what it offers the planet is, well, I can give you all this power. I can give you all this energy. I can give you all this talent. I can give you all these resources. And so the planet has to choose, or the person with that planet has to choose how to handle this thing, what to do with it, what it means, how to come to terms with it. And some stars are easier to work with than others.
I'm sure.
There's no question, like in everything in astrology, Jupiter is easier to work with for most people than Saturn is.
Yeah.
That's for most people. Not all people, but most people. Some people, it's, Jupiter's a problem and Saturn is, a time of great accomplishment. But in most cases, most people prefer Jupiter over Saturn. Well, in the same way, most people prefer some stars, some nice stars, like perhaps Vega or Betelgeuse, another, very positive star, over something like Algol and Antares. Both of, Algol was considered the worst star in the heavens, and Antares the second worst star in the heavens. Of course, they're both on my list because I love them dearly.
And then just in general, if we're looking at somebody's chart, for instance, we've got our 7 planets or whatever, but not all of our planets are going to be triggered by a fixed star. It'll perhaps be 1 or 2 in a chart that would be a main focus. Just would you say, or?
Well, yeah. When I work up a person's fixed stars and in the star profile readings I look at, it's going to be a few stars as opposed to 53 stars, which is 55 stars, which is my standard set of stars, because 55 stars aren't going to be relevant. You're only going to get a few that are going to be relevant.
Yeah.
And in many cases, you do not have a star that is literally rising at the time of birth, or culminating, or anti-culminating, or setting. It's rarer to have a star in that position than it is to have a star, a planet connected to a fixed star by projected position. The point being that it's very unfair what you get as fixed stars in terms of what people, we all get 12 signs, we all get 10 planets, we all get 12 houses.
Right.
Most of us have an assortment of aspects that we can sort of connect to, but you don't get all the fixed stars, and you may not necessarily get the fixed star that you're particularly entranced by, Well, I have, my sun opposes such and such a star, and I really love this star. Don't I have this star? Well, no, you don't, because it's only conjunctions. And if you start adding, it soon becomes overwhelming and impossible to get anything out of it. You have to be strategic and pick the stars that are really, specific to the individual, that they're being triggered by those particular planets, or they're contacting those planets, or if they're particularly fortunate, unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, they have a fixed star on one of the Earth's angles when they were born, which implies an incarnation of that energy. The person is literally an agent of that star walking around on the Earth. One case that I use a lot is Pablo Picasso, who had Sirius rising when he was born. And so, even though when you look at it from an ecliptic perspective, he's Leo rising, and the projected position of Sirius is around 13 degrees Cancer, which would be in his 12th house. But because Sirius is so far south, it actually was rising at the time of his birth. So he's a Sirius rising person, which means that he embodies the Sirius quality of leadership, of being the one who has a nose for what trends, what's upcoming, what's going on. And it's of course the brightest star in the sky. So it's not nearly as bright as any of the planets, but it's the brightest star in the sky. And so it brings that quality of leadership, of authority, of having a nose for. I always think of Sirius as the nose of the dog. It's like it knows where it's, because that's where it is for dogs, right?
Knows where it's at. Yeah.
That's where it's like knowing where things are going just by the smell of it is. And he certainly was a trendsetter and knew the trends before they came in terms of his artistic career, and people talk about that. And
and it wasn't always pretty, was it? His art.
Well, I mean, he one of his I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "The world doesn't make sense. Why should my paintings?"
There you go. Yeah.
He was when he started, is a perfectly good realist painter. Like he painted excellently as a realist when he was starting his career, and then went into exploring all these myriad of forms that is Picasso. But he became the archetype of the 20th century artist, with being in France, and with the tam and the painting and the whole thing. It is definitely this Picasso became a living archetype, and we can see that.
Yeah.
That is one of the things associated with Sirius, is this immortality, this enduring quality that lasts over the ages.
That is amazing. So you said that was like joint his ascendant. And so can we just talk a little bit about what kind of orbs are you looking at here with fixed stars?
Orbs. Well, it depends on what you think degrees are, right? Like everybody says 1 degree.
Yeah.
But what does 1 degree really mean? Like, I attended a seminar with John Frawley. I don't know if you know who he is, but
yes.
And he talked about the degrees being a step, right? Like that each 360 of the degree, they're all steps. So when we say 1 degree, what do we mean by 1 degree? Because it's possible you could have a fixed star at the end of 1 degree, and then you could have a planet at the beginning of 0 degrees, right? So what do you do when you have, they're technically further apart than a degree, but they're still step by step, right? They're still at the same steps with each other. So I tend to go by 1 step. Seems reasonable to me. Okay. One could make an argument for the 7 stars that I talked about. One could make an argument for bigger orbs. Certainly, Lily felt that Algol was so utterly terrible that it should have a 5-degree orb, which seems incredible. An incredible amount of influence for the end of Taurus, to have Algol being so strong. But for what I do 1 step. And then inevitably, because when you're looking at projected positions, because you're taking a sphere and you're collapsing it onto a disk, you're going to get clumping. You're going to get stars that are very close to each other and fall on top of each other, even though one could be very far north, one could be very far south. And yet on the ecliptic, when you compress it all down, they look very close together. So what do you do when you have a star? You have a pair of fixed stars, one at 23, one at 25, and then you have a planet at 24, right? Which is between 2 fixed stars. How do you work with multiple fixed stars touching a planet?
Yeah. This business, I mean, of how close is it together? We see this with the declination, right? You can say, the moons conjoin Jupiter. You can go and look and you can see, and because of declination, there's this massive, more than an 8 degree almost, So
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And when you look at projected positions, it's like the star, I mean, I have software that allows me to be able to take photographs, as it were, of the sky with
Yeah.
in a chart where you have, the moon positioned at one place and the fixed star that it's tied to is somewhere else. And it may be quite a distance in terms of, we're saying, oh, it's conjunct. Well, it's not quite conjunct. It's more like it's conjunct the projected position of that fixed star. And that's the thing that has to be taken into consideration. And when it comes to the Earth, as I say, you have to think about not about so much the degree of the fixed star, but rather what it's rising, what does it co-rise with? What is the degree
Right.
it co-rises? What is the degree that it co-culminates and so forth?
Yeah.
Co-setting and co-anti-culminating. Because that tells you the real relationship of the star to the Earth, as opposed to, I mean, the planets, you can make an argument for the ecliptic because that's where planets hang out. But the Earth, the lines of the Earth, that ascendant, descendant axis, and that MCIC axis, they are circles, not lines. And they touch all points in the sky in that grid. And
Because they're great circles, right? Whereas
they're great circles.
Whereas the fixed stars are on the smaller circle, they just got the,
Yeah, so
interesting. There's so much to this. And I mean, I know a little bit about fixed stars, but I'm nowhere, by no means an expert here. And so the meanings of the fixed stars are, as we would give attributes to planets, we would then, what we were saying is give some attributes to fixed stars and it's some kind of.
Well, I mean, what do we have? I mean, this was my frustration. I gave up on fixed stars for a while because I was entranced with them as a child, and because I was an astronomy guy, and I grew up in the country, and the fixed stars, of the northern hemisphere at least. I envy you that you've seen the southern hemisphere because I have not. And there are some bright stars there down there, from what I understand. Alpha Centauri and others, Ptolemy, as they say, Ptolemy and Aegina and the Southern Cross and so forth, and Canopus. There are lovely stars down there that I haven't seen, but the stars of the northern hemisphere growing up were very familiar. I knew their names. I knew the constellations because I had great skies to look at. Then when I got seriously into astrology and had money for the first time in my life and could buy books, and I got myself a copy of Robson's Fixed Stars and Constellations, it turned me off because it's such an unuseful, unhelpful book if you're trying to put stars into a psychological framework. And this is kind of my quest in terms of how do we take these stars that are largely outcome oriented. You have Sirius strong in your chart, you're going to be bitten by a dog, right? Like that's the kind of level of how crude it is in terms of how people understand the symbolism. Although I will say, when I bring this up, inevitably there's someone in the audience that says, "Yeah, I have Sirius and I was bitten by a dog." Oh. So no, it's anecdotal, but I would say any fixed star, if you had enough people, some of them would be bitten by a dog. Like I don't think that this is
right.
I don't think this is science. This doesn't prove anything. And what about all the examples of people who have Sirius that don't get bitten by dogs? As far as I know, Picasso was never bitten by a dog, and yet Sirius is particularly strong in his chart. So it's what do we do in terms of thinking about the meanings of these stars depends on what we think the fixed stars are. And there's never been a discussion about that. Not in psychological terms. We understand what planets are. Oh, yes. We understand that they are the active elements of the psyche. They are the things that have agency, the engines or organs of the soul that do things, that are like actors on the stage. We understand what signs are in terms of that they represent a particular style or way of being. So in a sense, they represent the kind of the resources and the dialogue and the clothing that the actor wears on stage, the costuming. We understand what houses are as the terrains, the environments where things take place, where environments that planets have to contend with circumstantial forces that they're placed into. We understand aspects as being indicators of what my good friend Nadia Shah refers to as conversations between the planets, between the actors, dialogue on the stage, But when it comes to fixed stars, there's been no discussion. What are fixed stars? Where do they fit into this? And I guess I'm the only one who said, well, I think fixed stars are kind of like planets in the sense that there's a desire element there, but they need planets to be able to get their expression. So when we're looking at fixed stars, we're looking at desires that seek expression through planets. And they're looking for, they sit up there in the sky. This is my fantasy about them. And they're waiting for a planet to lasso and say, hey, guess what I could give you, right? This, if you want it, which the planet then has to contend with, depending on what the planet is and how amenable it's going to be to the symbolism of those stars. And if it's a particularly bad mismatch, then there are other things involved. Well, a good example is Princess Diana's chart. Her Venus, for example, is placed between the stars Capulus and Algol, which Capulus is it's closer to Capulus than to Algol, but Capulus is the handle, literally the handle of the sword. And it's the spherical or circular cluster that marks the handle of the sword that is being held by Perseus. And Algol, of course, represents the blinking eye of the Medusa head that he's cut off. So these are not, particularly Venusian images, right? In terms of that Venus. It's like, how does that Venus and Taurus contend with these energy? Like, what does it do with bringing these energies to the fore? And Diana had to grow and develop into being someone who had an edge, who had a strength, who was able to fight back, who was able to assert herself as a woman, Venus, and incorporate these energies to the degree that she could incorporate them. Yeah. But even still, it's, when you look at the I did a seminar on relationship astrology, and I looked at the cross aspects between the royals. So Charles and Camilla, Charles and Diana and Dodi, and so forth. That Venus, it's interesting and creepy that Venus in Diana's chart is squared exactly, and I mean exactly to the minute, by Dodi's Pluto, right? Right. It's like activating the potential of that Venus and everything that's tied to it, which is, has this rather unfortunate, connection to, has a reputation for being a difficult energy to work with.
So what you're saying is that are you viewing then the planets as like conduits to accept the energy or not from these fixed stars? And is this what you're saying there?
Yeah, what I'm saying exactly that. I'm saying that the fixed star can't do anything unless it has a planet to work through. Oh. And the reason why I use the moon through Saturn, because we all agree, astrologers may disagree about a lot of things, but we agree on the primacy of the seven, right?
Yes, yes.
We all agree on that. Yes, we all agree, the primacy of the seven. There's differences of opinion of what that means. I often start at looking at a chart by looking at just the 7 planets and the fixed stars and the nodes, because that's all they had. They had the fixed. Before I look at the transpersonals, I look at the fixed stars, right? Then, because the transpersonals come later, right? They're later additions to the story.
And you can't see them, yeah.
You can't see them. I don't even know if we can call the transpersonal stars in the traditional sense because we cannot see them Uranus under ideal circumstances, apparently you can see, but it winks in and out, that tricky guy. But yes. To me, it's like they're not stars in the same way that the 7 are and the fixed stars are, because they're not celestial bodies that naturally give off light that we could see.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting how you're putting that forward, that the way that we as and are with our clients and so on can actually tap into this energy is only via what is already in our chart in these
Right,
planets.
right. Unless, of course,
On
it's
the
tied to the angle. Then, of course, then the person is literally an embodiment of that energy and walks around the earth, doing that star in a very direct way. The ancient Egyptians who did more star lore than anybody, and it's where we get a lot of the star lore, the original star lore in astrology is through the Egyptian strain of it. Um,
yeah, yeah.
Felt that the stars, when they crossed these lines, these particular lines that relate to the Earth, whether it be the horizon or the prime meridian overhead, that it humanizes the star, it earths it, it incarnates it. And so people who have a particularly have a one of those seven stars, for example, who embody that energy, like in Pablo Picasso is one with Sirius. Mozart was Aldebaran. He was an Aldebaran guy, so his stuff, Aldebaran is a star about building enduring things with integrity, and of course, his music will live long past you and I are dust and forgotten. The music of Mozart will still be played. So, that quality. I was just
Endurance.
looking. I was just looking at the chart of Nichelle Nichols, who I don't know if you know who she is, but she became Lieutenant Uhura on the
Oh
original
yeah.
Star Trek series, and um, was really more of a Broadway performer and dancer, and wanted to actually leave the show until one night a fan wanted to come see her, and it turned out to be Martin Luther King Jr., who said, and when she said, "I'm thinking I'm going to leave the show," he said, "Don't you leave the show. You're playing a very positive role model. You shouldn't walk away from that. You're giving women
Yeah.
of color a model to follow." And of course, post Star Trek, she got very involved in the NASA program and so on. So she is she is an embodiment of Fomalhaut, which is the star of hope and art and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of other themes. Again, with the fixed stars, you have to weave them into the themes that are already in the chart. It's like the asteroids,
Yeah.
can't put anything in there that isn't already in there in a way, right? I mean, tell students sometimes that you can't find it in the seven. How real is it? Like,
This is it. This is
yeah,
it. Yeah.
how real is it? I mean, I'm sure, Vesta conjunct Pallas is very important in some level, but like there's not to pick on Vesta and Pallas, but it's easy in astrology to become overwhelmed with too much. And and particularly when you're working with something as fixed stars, which is potentially a very large symbol set, in terms of
It's
how many,
huge. It's huge. And I think this
it's
is
huge.
really why I would say one of the reasons why mainstream astrologists don't go there is because there's so much to it. And also, it's difficult to actually discover, well, solar fire pulls it, but otherwise, where are you going to get this information from,
Well, I mean, let's go back to this because I think it's an important thing for me to talk about. I mean, I'm triangulating between, okay, what is this star? How is it figured? What are the stories about it? What does the astrological tradition say about it? And out of those things, we can I build a profile around, okay, this planet seems to be about these things. This seems to be the negative things about it. These are the resources that it has. And this is what we think. We think is the kind of agenda that it's pursuing. And with that kind of a framework wrapped around it, then fixed stars become potential celestial superpowers. They become energy sources for people to draw on to do things in the world. If you understand what the star is, and if you can find some way of making the bargain with it to work together, um, but you can only do that if you have some awareness of it, or somebody gives you that kind of an awareness of it, either not necessarily through an astrologer, but just through life. The
Yeah.
star shows up and presents itself. But yeah, this triangulation of meaning and looking at the star, then then I go and I look at famous people and I look at their lives and I look what they've accomplished and we see which stars are prominent and then we see yes, how appropriate or perhaps inappropriate it is for a particular star to be strong. Although what I usually find is that the fixed stars that people get are appropriate. And I think that that's part of the reason why, astrologers have problems with it is because you don't get, you know, you don't get Fomalhaut necessarily, right? Which is a
Yeah.
lovely, beautiful star, right? You don't, you might get Algol instead. And then what do you do with that, right? Like in terms of its reputation.
You want the good news or the bad news? Yeah.
Right, the bad news. Although I don't think Algol is as bad as people say it is. I think it's largely misunderstood. It's a highly creative star. A lot of creative people have Algol very strong. Two pianists I can think of, Billy Joel and Liberace, both have Pluto very strong, not Pluto, Algol very strong in their charts. Um, but there are certainly people who have you're going to find villains as well who have
Well,
you know
yes.
fixed stars, certain fixed stars strong as well. It's not an Algol is a trickier, admittedly, Algol is a trickier energy to handle than Fomalhaut is. Although, Fomalhaut can be delusional. It can be a delusional, it can lead you down the garden path if you're
Yeah.
not careful. So, they're all potentially, because they're not really personal, they're transpersonal energies and they're up there. They care nothing about comfort and that you get a good dinner and that you have a nice partner and that you have a nice job in a nice city in a nice country. That's the fixed stars don't care about any of this stuff. They're interested in their agenda, which is very ancient, very old, and they want to advance it. And to get their way, they can give you this extra spiritual boost, this extra little energy source that you can do something with or not do something with, depending on who you are.
Gosh, it sounds so interesting. So, Michael, are you offering fixed star readings for people?
Yeah, I do a star profile reading that where I go through a person's fixed stars and talk and it really is it's really an X-ray of those seven planets and what fixed stars are tied to them, and of course any fixed stars that are tied to those significant circles relative to location, the horizon and the prime meridian. And then which may or may not line up to the ecliptic. Some case, if it's close to the ecliptic, then it will line up. If it's not, it will look quite far away. I mean, I'm putting a presentation together for ESAR in June, and
Tell us what ESA is.
oh, ESAR is the International Society for Astrological Research, uh,
Fantastic.
and I'm presenting a piece on fixed stars, and I mean, there's only so much you can do in a 90-minute presentation, but my aim is to go through and set up the
Yes.
blocks. You have to set up the blocks of the whole approach that I'm taking to astrology. I'm coming from the school of thought that sees astrology as reflective rather than causal, and I'm looking at the side of the ledger that says I'm on the side of free will and that it's indeterminate in terms of what one does with it, which is a reasonable place to go. And my astrology, I look at it more as a framework for generating insight than the truth, right? Astrology is, to me, the finger that points at the truth. It is not the truth in itself. And we can argue about the finger and how many rings it should have and what color it should be and what kind of shirt it should be tied to or whatever. We can argue about these things, but the thing that's important is the thing that it's pointing to. And so at the end of the day, in terms of all the astrologies that we practice, I'm more interested in what do you see rather than why you see it. Well, it's because of, declination this and Chiron that and so
Yeah.
forth and so on that informs me that if this is so, I'm less interested in why you think it's so. I want to know what you see. What do you see when you use the tools that you have rather than telling me how great your tools are? So
Ah.
so in a reading with somebody, I always note where, the major fixed stars are, but I may not I may not say anything about those fixed stars specifically in a reading because it's just like, I'm sure, Allison, that there's lots of things you're looking at in a horoscope when you do a reading that you say nothing about during the course of the reading, but it informs you in terms of
Yes, yes,
your
yes.
own thinking and your own processing of the chart. Well, in the same way, the fixed stars for me are something I always consult. I always want to have some idea of where things are, even if I don't go into them in depth like I do in the profile. But it's very much through they give me another lens to examine the themes that are there in the chart and give me a way of confirming or giving me greater detail about a theme that's already in the chart.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That when working with clients' charts, you only have so much time, but you're seeing these roadmaps and pointers with everything you're looking at. And if you're focusing in on fixed stars as you are, clearly you're going to be leaning heavily on that as well for your I don't want to call it intuition, but from what you're bringing forward from the
Well,
chart.
one of the things that obsessed me as an astrologer was, at the beginning, people would say, well, when such and such a planet is strong. And I'd be the irritating student in the back of the class would say, what do you mean by strong? What makes a planet strong? What makes a planet not so strong and so forth? And one of those factors, not the only, by any means, the only factor, we could talk about essential dignity. We can talk about house placement and angles and like a million things that can influence
Yeah.
planetary strength. But one of the factors I believe is fixed stars. Fixed stars tell you something. If a planet has a fixed star, it has a magic ring, and whether what it wants to do with it is another question. But there's a power there, that
Potential.
potential that can be used, and it gives the planet something more to work with.
Wow. So could I then ask you for people who are perhaps just starting out or have only just heard about fixed stars right now, do you have a book recommendation that you could say is a general introduction to fixed stars?
Well, there is no general introduction to fixed stars. There isn't. There's Robson's book is around, it's in print, it will always be in print.
Yes,
I don't know how useful it will be. When you read about fixed stars where such and such a fixed star is related to, well, serious dog bites, there's another star, I can't remember which one, by reptiles, and it's
falling down a well and
falling down a well or dying of the clap in a foreign country. It's very outcome oriented.
yeah.
So, but it's considered the standard text, and certainly many traditional astrologers, it's laughable that they think it's traditional in terms of the way that they're doing it. But traditional astrologers say, oh, well, this is the book. This is, this, but it's not that old. It was written in the 20s, so it's not really that old. And it gives no sources. Where did he come up with all this stuff? There's, there's no quotation or whatever. There's star names, their lurid meaning by Hinckley, I think it is. And that's an encyclopedic book that gives you all the constellations and the stars and their colors and associate how they were named, what the names mean, and all that. That's a book. That's more of a reference book, and I use that book. Rigger put out a book called The Power of the Fixed Stars in the 70s, and that was the last sort of encyclopedic approach to it. And it's a lot like it's a little better than Robson, but it's a lot like Robson. And then, of course, there's Bernadette Brady's stuff on fixed stars, and Brady's book of fixed stars is, Bernadette was a huge inspiration to me and set me down the path of reinvestigating fixed stars. Although I didn't exactly follow her system, she built her own system in terms of using fixed stars by Paran and so forth, which we don't have time to go into, but she has a different system for how she uses fixed stars. In part, I have her software and I'm indebted to her, although I don't totally agree with her. But her book, Brady's Book of Fixed Stars, gives you some alternate ways of looking at the star symbolism than what we see with Robson. I just don't think it goes far enough because it doesn't it doesn't open up the question of what are these things psychologically? What do they mean for a person who has a fixed star? And because nobody's really addressed this question, fixed stars were never brought into the contemporary paradigm of astrology. It wasn't something that they were considered sort of old, that they didn't survive the transition. Nobody looked at them that way, although though they were out there, but nobody brought them into the psychological age. I'm kind of a lone voice saying that we should be looking at the psychology of these,
Right.
what they mean for a person to have a fixed star, what they have, what their experience is, and most importantly, what they can do to optimize and be the best version of and flourish with that particular fixed star placement.
So are you working on research at the moment going down that road?
Yeah, well, I'm writing about it, right? I'm compiling all of what the astrological tradition has to say. I'm as part of my own work with them. I mean, I'm looking at this point, I've collected most of the major texts on the fixed stars that are available.
Right.
They've been written in the last 50 years, or more than 50 years, or 100 years. More than 100 years. I've got a huge collection of books on the fixed stars, and most of it is unusable. A lot of it is unusable in terms of the kind of work that I do, which is why I've gone down this road of psychologizing them, because that's my main interest in astrology, is helping people with their horoscopes be the best person that they can be and go where they want to go and achieve the things they want to achieve. That's the whole reason why one does astrology, in my view, or at least why I do astrology.
Yeah.
So I find myself, when these fatalistic fixed stars, we have to start looking at them psychologically, seeing them psychologically, and seeing how we can help clients best work with, the Algols of the heavens, or the Antares of the heavens, which, people do. And these, very famous people, very significant people, which has always been the kind of myth about fixed stars, that they bring fame, success, and notoriety, or rise and fall, dramatic heights and dramatic falls, and so forth. Lily felt that fixed stars were capable of doing things that the seven planets were not capable of. So
you're taking a different approach.
Well, I think when you look at it, the fixed stars are just one more thing. And to say that, only famous people get fixed stars is crazy, because of course that's not true.
Yeah.
When you start, especially the more you start adding into it, like if you say, well, only the bright stars. Well, how many is that? 20 stars? And which ones do again, which stars do you use under, based on what criteria, and how do you organize your meanings about them? How do you understand what they do? And so when I look at a person's chart, when I do these presentations about fixed stars, I pull up examples and walk through a case study chart and say, hey, it's, whether it be Princess Diana or Tony Robbins or Oprah Winfrey or Jung, or, whoever, we get a sense of what those fixed stars are and how they, how we can judge whether does this seem appropriate for what we know about this person. Because with super famous people, their public histories are known in a way that allows us to be able to see the themes more readily than if they're not as well known.
Right.
But it's fame within the context of one's area. It isn't necessarily super fame. And then the super famous may not necessarily have stars that are particularly marked. So I don't think I think it's interesting that this is the association, whether you're reading Anonymous at 379 or you're reading Lily's Christian Astrology, this notion of fixed stars give you fame, fixed stars make you a star. I don't think it's necessarily true, but I think that it does give you a certain ability that you have an opportunity to work with or ignore And there may be consequences to ignoring a potential within yourself. So my job as an astrologer is to make people aware of their potentials and give them possible strategies for how they can best utilize what's been given to them.
Wow, Michael, this sounds like it's such an interesting topic, and the fact that you're researching and working with it and with your clients as well, I think it's great. So, if our listeners wanted to contact you, what is your website details, please?
Sure, at michaelbarwick.com. That's Michael. Barwick is BARWICK. .com is my website, but they can contact me directly. Michael at michaelbarwick.com, and we can set up a consultation, or I can give them information about presentations that I'm doing. This year, I'm quite busy with this presentation in June for ESAR. I'm speaking for the London School of Astrology in September. Ask the expert about imagine fixed stars. It seems to be my year to talk about my subject, and it's becoming trendy. Fixed stars are becoming trendy, although I've been at it for a while, and now I'm seeing a number of people are doing seminars on fixed stars. So I'm not the only voice, and I think that that's great. I think people should be talking about it. But my question is, what do you say they are psychologically? I want to know. Tell me what you think. So it's great. It's great that people are diving into the area. So yes, I'm speaking for the London School of Astrology, and then there is talk of a few other events during the course of the year, but we'll see how they pan out. We don't know for sure.
Fantastic. Well, I will put the links to your website and your email address and to your where you'll be page and what have you below the podcast and on the blog post as well.
Fantastic.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your topic of fixed stars. It is incredibly interesting, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to enjoy it as well.
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure that people will get inspired, or at least I hope that people will get inspired to keep looking up at those bright lights in the sky that have so much to tell us.
Fantastic. Keep looking up. That is great. Michael Barwick, thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure. Anytime, Alison.
So that was great talking there about fixed stars. If you have found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with someone who would be interested. If you like, you can email us at starzology@gmail.com and say that you heard about us through the podcast. You can visit our website at starzology.com. My name is Alison Price. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.